The year was 2017. Donald Duck was elected El Presidente. The dancing Slender Woman triggered Article 50 pushing forward Brexit. North Korea tested a new type of Metal Gear that could launch missiles to anywhere in the world, but perhaps the most memorable of all, Square Enix unleashed onto the world Nier Automata. Through recommendation, I was introduced to this game and blown away by how incredible it was. The story, characters, gameplay, soundtrack, everything about it resonated with me in such a profound way. I couldn't believe how under the radar it was in my own little world, and how easily I would have missed out on what I now consider one of my favourite games of all time. It was so under the radar in fact that at the time of playing I didn't even know it was a sequel to another game released over a decade ago now, in 2010, titled Nier. Or Nier Gestalt outside of Japan, and then Nier Replicant in Japan. Two different versions of the same game, both following the same story but told through the eyes of different protagonists. Gestalt being told through the eyes of a father, the other Replicant having the tale told from the perspective of a brother. Still with me? This convoluted release was the brainchild of Yoko Taro as creative director. Known for his creation of the Dragon Guard series, which began on the PlayStation 2, in which Nier is actually a spin-off based on one of those games' endings. Yeah, it gets wilder, but for many he will always be praised as the world-renowned background designer on Time Crisis 2, obviously his most accomplished work. Regardless of your knowledge of Japanese game developers, Taro today is responsible for some fascinating games that many fans believe to be unappreciated, Nier being the most admired amongst the players. After some research, it appears I was not the only one whose head Nier flew straight over though, as when it was initially released, it was not a big seller at all, but over time has become somewhat of a cult classic. Automata followed and became a surprise hit for Square Enix, selling more than 5 million copies to date. My time of Automata gave me the goal in life to seek out this previous installment in the franchise and give it a go, but I failed miserably. No longer the owner of means to play an Xbox 360 or PS3 game, my endeavour to play the original Nier came to nothing more than a distant wish fading away, like a fart in the wind. Until now.
Don't let your guard down. I guess that was a tad obvious.
Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139 has now brought that dream to a reality. Yes, that is actually the full title of the game to give you even more understanding of how this all works. And this time around developed by Toylogic as opposed to the original development company Caviar, who coincidentally closed their doors after the release of Nier, Replicant is developed as something somewhere between the already blurred lines of what defines a remaster or a remake. Being a new version of the Japanese version of the original game, this new release for me, as you can probably tell, was riding the hype train at full speed ahead. But did it reach my desired destination? Yes, it did. Sort of. Like all trains, there are many unscheduled delays in getting from point A to B, some even bringing the journey to a complete standstill on what would otherwise be a gripping experience from beginning to end. My name is Nadj with the NextGEN broadcast, and this is my review of Nier Replicant version 1.2... You know what? Let's just stick with Replicant. You know what else should stick? This channel in your subscriptions. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming videos of the upcoming releases. First things first for all you Nier enthusiasts out there, I will be comparing this game a lot to Automata. Yes, this is technically a re-release slash remaster slash remake of the game that paved the way to Automata, so perhaps I should give it some slack over the criticisms I have. But guess what? I'm not reviewing a game in 2010, I'm reviewing this game from my own perspective now in 2021, and unfortunately this is the biggest problem with Replicant. To quote the big cheese himself, Taro described the game as the following: "This game is a version upgrade of a title released 10 years ago under the name of Nier." That's right, it's not a remake or a remaster, it's a It's a version upgrade. In the beginning, I only intended for it to be a remaster. I think this quote from Taro sums up the game perfectly for better and for worse. At times the game looks pretty good. Whilst it is not the most realistic looking, it has this beauty to it and can be quite picturesque. Looking across the water at the shopping districts, immersing yourself with the lush landscapes, mountains and terrains and the backdrops, look great from afar, and there's some decent lighting effects as well. Don't get too close though, as you will start to see the data design. Objects within the world, such as rocks and shrubbery, concrete walls, debris, furniture, can sometimes look as if they were a JPEG image copy and pasted straight into the game, looking more like a late PS3, early PS4 game. Whilst they are not too distracting, it is noticeable, and the views are perhaps best indulged in from a distance, which should be okay for everyone, seeing as we've all been keeping our distance for the last 12 months or so anyway. Character models, however, are the best looking part of this game. The design style has this soft textured look to them, which added to their charm. This does make their complexions and skin at times maybe look a little too perfect with how clean and silky smooth they are, like a filtered catfish on Instagram, but it gives them this slightly off anime vibe which I liked, again, like a filtered catfish on Instagram. The character design work is great, from the costumes and general appearances looking quite unique within the world. But in good old Nier fashion, some are more interesting to look at than others. If you thought Nier Automata was a little too revealing when 2B climb ladders, then you'll probably be gobsmacked with the clothing choice of companion Kaine. I mean, just look at this. I generally thought I was going to start getting a whiff of her bumhole through the screen, but more concerningly, does she even have nipples?
Why's that lady in her underwear?
I fear we have greater issues to deal with.
But come on, grow up, no one ever plays video games for excessively sexualised female characters. So what about the gameplay and the story of Replicant? Replicant is an action-adventure hack-and-slash set in the fantastical world many a year in the future, set in a village which is adequately named Player Village, or in my case, Natch Village. The world has become a desolate wasteland after plague. A disease called the Black Scroll has swept the lands, wiping out most of humanity. What remains are barren lands with settlements of survivors scattered about doing what they can to live another day. You play as the protagonist of Brother, whose name is whatever you so choose it to be, as he has dedicated his life to searching for a cure to the Black Scroll in an attempt to heal his sister Yona from the disease she is slowly dying from.
It won't be much longer, I promise.
What follows is a story of love, desperation, and the ability to make full-grown men shed a tear or two. One thing that is becoming increasingly clear with Taro's games is the unique narrative structures and his desire to tell stories that may not always be what they seem. Replicant is no different. Fans of Taro's work will not be strangers to playing through games multiple times to understand the full story. First off, our playthroughs A and B to get most of the story, and these are straightforward, requiring you to finish the game twice, second playthrough starting from the halfway point. On each subsequent playthrough, the general structure of the game will remain the same, with additional cutscenes and dialogue giving more context to the narrative and lore. Perhaps in this game though it is a little too specific and tedious in the end game, seeing the third playthrough requires you to get all of the weapons in the game, some which can be missed, and it's just quite a tedious task to get to. This progression structure may put some players off, as this naturally comes with a repetitive nature, but this is a big part of what makes Nier unique, and I like the concept of it. Compared to Automata, this isn't as epic or grand in its stakes or scale, taking a more focused and in a weird way relaxed approach to its themes of family and a close-knit community, in this world more akin to a medieval, more fantastical setting as opposed to Automata's more sci-fi approach. Whilst I do not think the story was as gripping or its themes as thought-provoking as Automata's, the characters within Replicant are far more interesting and likeable. No pun intended, but as opposed to the android characters you control in Automata, the characters in Replicant are far more human. The dialogue shared between them and the banter thrown at each other is genuinely funny and believable. The protagonist is likeable enough, playing as two versions of him, a younger, more innocent childlike version, followed by an older, tougher version for the second half of the game. The development of the character is well done, and although he seems to have nothing else matters except what I want attitude to him when playing as the older version sometimes, it feels justified with the context of what is going on. A huge contributor for this is the voice acting, and it is done very well and adds plenty of personality and emotion to the characters and has such powerful delivery to it. Standout characters having to be Kaine, a potty-mouthed hussy.
How can someone with such a big smart brain get hypnotized like a little bitch, huh?
And Grimoire Vice, a floating book with the persona of that to a pretentious professor.
Good to see you, Kaine. Although I don't think anyone has ever accused me of being a little bitch before.
The interactions between them all are very funny and add a lot of charm, and as the story progresses you can really feel the bond developing between them, making the late game stakes and revelations that bit more gripping, and at times more heartbreaking. But I could not even begin to imagine the difference in this fantastic story presentation without the music. The soundtrack is phenomenal. Whilst I'll admit the tunes can get a little repetitive later on, a problem I also had with Automata, there is no denying the power behind the music. Epic in its operatic scale, it works very well at building you up ready to jump in head first into the action. This is when Replicant is at its best. These moments are so engrossing and you will feel yourself rooting for our heroes, and when shit finally hits the fan, you'll find yourself sprayed in it just like when you wake up the next morning after a Vindaloo. Very emotional, and I found myself shouting at the TV on more than one occasion. It is these moments in which I understand why this game is considered a masterpiece among fans and is a cult classic. Momentous moments in the story will leave you with many different feelings lingering in your mind long after you've put down the controller. Loss, shock, disbelief. This game stayed in my mind for hours after I turned it off at times that I just had to go back. Unpredictable and powerful stuff. Whilst these moments are at the peak of the game's appeal, this game does unfortunately have some very serious flaws with its pacing and gameplay. The core gameplay premise is satisfying enough on the surface. Melee combat is competent and fluid when you're in the heat of it, so it works. You have your standard attacks assigned to the square button, strong attacks to the triangle, and Vice being a literal spellbook provides you with magical attacks, some of which are ranged, some of which are just extreme heavy attacks, or defensive. You gain spells as you progress through the game, having all of them by the halfway point. They will immediately be familiar to you if you have played Automata before, and these range from firing large shards into enemies, swinging blades, and doppelganger buddies to assist you in combat. You can have two spells equipped at one time, one assigned to L1 and the other R1 on PlayStation. I found myself using only around half of the spells. For my personal playstyle, I found some more useful than others. You cannot upgrade the spells, they just come as they are, each being more powerful the longer you hold down the trigger for it, draining a magic gauge. The different melee weapons have different attacks and defense power, and you can use words you collect through the game as buffs to your weapons and spells, from adding more attack power to poison or to add an ability to confuse enemies. But other than this and the weapon's visual look, there is not much difference between them. A really weird design choice I found was that for the first half of the game you can only equip swords. For this time I really thought this was it for the combat. At the halfway point you do unlock the usage of spears and two-handed weapons, which is a nice addition. I just found it strange that it took half my first playthrough for this to even become a feature. Each weapon type you can find numerous versions of these weapons, but you essentially have one weapon for half the game and three for the other. Whilst there are dozens of weapons to collect and outside of the damage output, it's just cosmetic. No difference in movesets, no difference in fighting styles or attacks. They are exactly the same apart from the speed the attacks are dealt depending on the weapon's weight, be it light, moderate or heavy. Once you realise this, you realise that it doesn't really matter which weapon you use. You might as well just pick the coolest looking one rather than choosing it for its skill, as long as the damage output isn't too low, which is quite disappointing and primitive combat system. This would perhaps be forgiven if the skills it takes to use these weapons were something you had to work towards, but the combat loop is very simplistic. Fun for a time until it loses its appeal when you look back and think, I've been doing the same moves over and over again, so you input different button prompts to knock out some sweet combos, but can't really get much more out of it. For a game with a combo meter, you will be pulling off the same combos repeatedly because the game is limited to the amount of player input it allows in the combat mechanics. You can't fluently switch up the weapons you are using on the fly to shake it up. Well, you can by holding down the left or right on the D-pad, but the character model will come to a stop to equip it, breaking the flow of combat. Automata allowed you to equip two weapons at one time and intertwine your attacks for some sweet ass moves, something I feel they really should have transferred into this game. The magic spells help it keep it engaging, but as I said you will likely choose a couple and not switch them out because most of them are not that useful, or because you have to go into some menus to change these up, which in itself, again, breaks the flow of combat. I would have perhaps liked to see an option to slide through the spells with the directional buttons instead of changing the weapon type, as this likely would have pushed me to at least try out some lesser used spells more often. The enemies you will be facing, shades, are a pretty standard affair. You have your standard grunts, larger heavy hitters, small but numerous little bastards, and the further you get into the game the more powerful they get. Although, hell if I know where they started getting all their armour from, maybe they have a merchant too. The game's camera perspective does change smoothly for all different combat scenarios, whether that be a 2D side-scroller or top-down, but the use of this is very underutilised and nowhere near as creative as Automata was, which is a shame because I really enjoyed those segments. The most frustrating part of Replicant, however, the thing that really holds it back, is the pacing and structure in its quest design. There are some great set pieces throughout the game and some decent to epic boss fights. The first or sometimes even second time you enter a new area, it is fun, then you'll go there again, and again, and again. Even the red light district would become boring after your 27th run through it, but unlike the variety of titties in the window, there is nothing new to see in the locations each time you pass through in Replicant, and you will be passing through a lot. And if I have to go and see Popola one more time...
I should go to the library and see what Popola's up to.
And tell Popola I said thanks, okay?
You got it. Okay, I'm off to Popola's. See you later. Let's see if Popola has any ideas. Anyway, I need to go talk to Popola.
Heavens, that was exhausting.
Tell me about it. Anyway, let's go give Popola an update.
Mobile phones do not exist in this world, so it makes sense, but it just made the progression really drag sometimes. Eventually you can ride a board to ride through the open areas at a more efficient pace, but I'd rather things happen in the world around you rather than wanting to just sprint through the world to get to the next interesting story development. The side quests are some of the most uninspired I've seen in a long time and not very fun at all after the first few, with some very few exceptions. Most of them require you to speak to an NPC, go to the other side of town to speak to another NPC, find 10 items, kill a couple of shades, and then back to the quest giver. Rinse and repeat over and over again.
Hey, wait. You're that kid who does whatever people ask him to do, right? Well then, go find my boyfriend.
I'm not even joking when I say one quest that involved me finding a shade in town had me run back and forth 3 times to a different location to be given a revelation that I saw coming as soon as I accepted the quest. In the end, I was avoiding side quests more than I was accepting them, which is a problem. What I find bizarre about all of this is how aware the developers are of the repetitive, mundane nature of it all. Vice, the floating yellow pages of knowledge, says exactly what I was thinking at many times, clearly with the intention of breaking the fourth wall to some extent. He is constantly moaning about the favours and quests you are eagerly picking up for others, and with more back and forth and ups and downs than a fucking yo-yo, the game is mocking itself for its pacing and worn out gameplay design. But if the game developers were so self-aware of this annoying cliche, then why retain it? I cannot forget that this game is a version upgrade of an older game, and that this was all clearly in the original game, and so was probably the self-aware dialogue. But upon reflection when creating this game, perhaps the developers should have listened to the old and wise words of Vice and reduced some of the dated mechanics and designs, trimming the fat so to speak, or reinventing them with a modern twist. This is a difficult one because despite my feelings on the game's dated feel, I have to respect what Nier has done here, and not necessarily for what it has done for itself with this game, but what it did for the series. Automata for me was a true upgrade from Nier. Whilst Automata is not perfect, as it clearly has some of Nier's flaws carried over into it with its repetition, the game had natural progression from this game, being an upgrade itself with the gameplay department, not just visually but mechanically making the repetitive nature less of a chore. Each new playthrough in that game included something new, whether that be the changing characters and each character having a slightly different take to make it less of a grind. But you know what, if Nier Replicant has done something for me, it has solidified in my mind the Nier franchise is destined for greatness. Perhaps 10 years ago I would have enjoyed playing this game more than I did today, and I can see why. I love its unique style of storytelling, the world they create, and at times the gameplay can be fun in the bigger moments before you start to see through the dated design. Although it is not the masterpiece I wanted, it is the game that I needed to play as a fan of Automata. Despite many of its shortcomings, I did enjoy my time with it thanks to the many special moments, twists and turns, and the deep diving into the game's lore and tales. If you are a fan of the original and or Automata, this is a recommendation, provided you are willing to push through the dated systems. If this is your first Nier experience, just know what you're getting in for before you spend your time and hard-earned cash to make sure it's something that you will definitely enjoy from beginning to end. Taro has said he believed Nier Automata to be a fluke with its success, and I hope he was wrong. This game was without a doubt a safe bet for Square Enix to dip their toes into the water and test that theory. I don't know the first thing about game development budgets, but I can safely assume this game was a hell of a lot cheaper to make than an entirely new game, being that the framework was already laid out for them, and if this sells well, then I can confidently say we will be seeing a third installment within the Nier universe. To become a franchise of true greatness, it needs to take all of its unique appeal and modernise and advance the gameplay to make the repetition something you enjoy, as opposed to being a nuisance, something which Automata did improve upon, but not perfect. Which may be a difficult task without jeopardising what makes Nier Nier, but I would sure love to see them try, because creating a masterpiece, they are nearly there. But at the end of the day, this was all just my opinion, and it will no doubt be different to yours. Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe for more upcoming videos. Thanks for tuning into the NextGEN broadcast. Until next time.